You see those orange parts are the upper limbs. So let's start explaining this. So our first is the sternoclavicular joint. Now, in the sternoclavicular joint is the joint between the sternum. As you can see, the sternum is also called the what? The breastbone. Is the joint between the sternum and the clavicle. So that is how we derive that name, sternoclavicular joint. So the joint between the sternum and the clavicle, which is also called the collarbone or the beauty bone, is called the sternoclavicular joint. We have the acromioclavicular joints. So what is the acromioclavicular joint? So the word acromion means the uppermost part of the scapula. The uppermost part of the scapula. So if you go back to this diagram, you see that we have that uppermost part of this scapula. I hope all of you know what is scapula. So that uppermost part of this scapula is called the acromion. So when they join together with the clavicle, so look at the clavicle there. So when they join together with the clavicle, we call it the acromioclavicular joint. The acromioclavicular joint is the joint between the acromion, which is the upper part of the scapula, and the clavicle. We now have the acromioclavicular joint. While sternoclavicular joint is the joint between the sternum and the what? And the clavicle. Now, next, we have the glenohumeral joint. The glenohumeral joint. So the glenohumeral joint is the joint between the fossa cavity of the scapula and the head of the humerus. So as you can see here, this is our humerus. This is our humerus. So the joint between the humerus and the fossa of the scapula is called the glenohumeral joint. That is what we call the glenohumeral. So we have the elbow joints. We have the elbow joints. So the elbow joint is that joint that allow the flexion and extension of the forearm. You know, we have the pectoral region, we have the shoulder region, we have the arm, which is also known as the bronchium, we have the forearm, which is also known as the antibronchium, and we have the hands. So those things make up the upper limbs. So we have the elbow joint. The elbow joint is that joint that allows the movement of the what? The extension and the flexion movement of the forearm. That is what we call the elbow joint. So we have the radioulnar joint. In that radioulnar joint is the articulation of the radio and the ulnar at the elbow joints. So we have the elbow joint, we have the radioulnar joints. Mean that before that elbow joint, the radioulnar, the radius and the ulnar joins together, they articulate together to form the radioulnar joint. So we have the wrist joint. We have the what? The wrist joint. If you don't want to call it the wrist joint, you call it the what? If you don't want to call it the wrist joints, we call it the what? The radiocarpal joints. So we have the carpals, these carpals. So in these carpals, we now have the radiocarpal joint, also known as the what? The wrist joints. So the wrist joint is also referred to as the what? As the radiocarpal. So why do we call it radiocarpal joint instead of ulnar carpal joint? Because the radiocarpal joint is, if you carefully observe the diagram, the ulnar is the one that is articulating with the carpals. That's what we call it the radiocarpal joint. The articulation is in the radius and the carpal. Why the ulnar articulates with the radius, and the radius now make the connection between the radius and the what? And the carpal. That's what we call it the wrist joints or the radiocarpal joints. So we have the intercarpal joints. So what are these intercarpal joints? Intercarpal joints are joints between the carpals. So if you see, we have the 8 carpals. So in the 8 carpals, those joints that exist between these carpals are called the intercarpal joints. We have the carpometacarpal joint. So the carpometacarpal joint is the joint that exists between the carpals and the metacarpals. The joints that exist between the carpals and the metacarpals are called the carpometacarpal joints. So that is our carpal and that is my what? My metacarpals. So the joints that exist between the carpals and the metacarpals are called the metacarpal joints. So we have the intermetacarpal joints. So if you observe, in the intermetacarpal joints is the joints that joins the metacarpal joints. So before the metacarpal joints make an articulation with before they make an articulation with the radius, with the carpals, there is this articulation in between them before they meet that carpals. So this articulation between them are called the intercarpal joints. Okay, so next we have the metacarpophalangeal joints. So the metacarpophalangeal joint is the joint between the metacarpals and the phalanges. So the phalanges, the joint between the metacarpals and the phalanges are called the metacarpophalangeal joints. So we have the proximal interphalangeal joints. Now, in the proximal interphalangeal joints is the joints between the interphalanges. So the proximal and distal. The word proximal means it is closer from its origin. So the forearm. So when I mean proximal means it is more closer to the forearm. It is more closer to the elbow joint. It is more closer to the scapula. So the distal, it is further away. So proximal means when something is closer from the origin, and distal means when something is a bit further away or further away from its origin. So the proximal interphalangeal joint, the word interphalangeal joint is the joints between the phalanges. That's what we call it, the interphalangeal joints. At the joints between the phalanges. Why the proximal means the joints between the phalanges that is more closer to the origin. Why the distal interphalangeal joints are the joint that is far from the origin. Now we have what's called the interphalangeal joint. This interphalangeal joint is only found in the thumb. In the thumb, that's why we have this interphalangeal joint. Acromial. So let's go. Sternoclavicular joints, the acromioclavicular joint, the glenohumeral joints, the elbow joint, the radioulnar joint. So in this radioulnar joint, we also have the proximal radioulnar joint and the distal radioulnar joint. We have the wrist joint, or we call it the radiocarpal joint. Don't worry, I'm going to explain all these things for you. We have the intercarpal joints. We have the carpometacarpal joints. We have the intermetacarpal joints. We have the metacarpophalangeal joints. We have the proximal interphalangeal joints. We have the distal interphalangeal joints, and we have the interphalangeal joints. So all these are joints of the upper limbs. I hope you learned everything you needed for this course. See you in my next class, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more videos like this on Solutions.